Welcome to this Tuesday edition of Bury Your Bookie. I'm Jeff DeForest. Very happy to have you guys with us. Although yesterday, both Mike Jones and I were in favor of making a wager on the Chicago Bears, which certainly looked like it was the right play throughout the majority of that ball game against the Minnesota Vikings last night. Last two games of the NFL. Wow. I mean, if that didn't have you in need of some kind of therapy, depending on which side you were on, even if you were a winner, you had to be laced with anxiety throughout the majority of the contest. The Buffalo Bills coming back and covering their point spread at home with an outright victory. Last second job against the Baltimore Ravens. And then last night, Minnesota Vikings getting handled by the Chicago Bears. We both thought the Bears were in there with a big shot. They were getting a point at post time against the Minnesota Vikings. The Vikings starting a rookie quarterback in J.J. McCarthy, a rookie in the sense that he was with the team last year, out for the entire season, torn meniscus early in the preseason a year ago. You didn't know exactly how it was going to play out. The McCarthy skills that he displayed at Michigan when they won the national championship, where he demonstrated a better arm than most people had given him credit for having, especially in the championship game. And we knew that he was capable of making plays with his so-called legs, running the football as well, and seemed to be a very heady quarterback. But looked like anything but the case in the early going last night. And I was conflicted on this one. And I don't know how you guys feel about this. Our loyalty is to our viewers. You guys that tune in the show here, Bury Your Bookie, and have for the last year, what we feel an allegiance to you and a responsibility to try and give you some kind of chance to actually go out there and do what we're claiming we're going to do, and that is bury your bookie. You don't necessarily want to always go against your own opinion because some guy on a podcast or on a video stream is recommending you do something differently. In fact, I think we pointed out many times that the more sophisticated the handicapping logic, the more unlikely it seems you are to actually cash a bet on that particular play. And we're going to get into that a little bit here with a stat that I mean, you're talking about minutia. This isn't quite in that category because I do think it's relevant. But I actually thought it was some kind of thing that afflicted young children that might be, unfortunately, mentally challenged. ADOT. Doesn't it sound like something that a special needs kid would have and unfortunately have to deal with? But it actually designates average depth of target is the official designation, ADOT, and it's applicable to a game that we're going to talk about here, which will be one of the marquee games. In fact, game day is going to be set up there in Knoxville, Tennessee, as the Tennessee Volunteers take on the Georgia Bulldogs. Georgia Bulldogs, a year removed from their back-to-back championships, and maybe even further removed from that level of dominance. They've played two cupcakes so far, so we'll get into handicapping that. But last night, and I've mentioned this a few times during the course of the year or so, we've been doing a show here at Bury Your Bookie, that I have a personal, now this is all a friendly thing. It's not some form of illegal bookmaking. I don't want to implicate myself in some criminal activity, but on a friendly basis, I go head to head. I don't know, maybe a lot of you guys that do this sort of thing, although I doubt that it's done in the same fashion, where I have a guy that sends me his picks every pretty much like 4 out of 5 days when there is action on the board in football, college and pro. And whatever team he gives me, that's the one I have. Now, I've been implying to him for years that his spreads seem to be a little bit suspect. I don't know. He's from Italy and of Italian descent, so it's unlikely he's a subscriber to a newspaper that circulates here in South Florida called the Jewish Journal. I don't know if that's around, but it's like a biweekly publication. And it does seem like when he's feeding me the lines on these games that I'm stuck with. I mean, I don't have any say in the matter. He just says to me, hey, you have, in this case, it was the Vikings last night. So in spite of the fact that I like the Bears and naturally was rooting for the Bears to cover the point spread for the sake of our viewers that were taking our advice yesterday on that, which it was not an overwhelmingly solid pick. We just thought, the Bears are probably better than they appear to be, that Ben Johnson was going to make a nice debut, and you're going against a guy that's not played it down in the NFL during the regular season in McCarthy. So all the reason in the world to think getting points at home underdog, with the Chicago Bears last night, as meager as the spread was, it was basically a pick 'em, but at one point what was the right play. Now, I end up doing this personal bookmaking venture with my buddy Francesco. I'm handed the Vikings. So now, where do you go with that? I don't want to lose money to this guy, but at the same time, I don't want to bury our adoring public. So my rooting interest, which way would you go? Would you rather be right to the people that you're talking to on a show like this? Or would you rather be correct in not having to hand over the designated amount of money per game? Now we settle up at the end of the season, and the guy's off to a reasonably decent start. Although we know through history, I don't think I've ever lost money to this guy. There's no juice involved, which also is not in my favor. And as I said, some prohibitive lines that he gives me. Last night, it happened to be on the number, Vikings -1. So I ended up at least getting a fair shake in that regard. But you're watching the entire ball game conflicted. I would have rather been right and delivered for the people out there. And Mike Jones, of course, was on the show with me yesterday. Was naturally thinking, "Wow, look at this performance by the Bears, dominating." You got 3-and-out, 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 3-and-out for the Vikings. They're doing nothing. And it looks like they're going to get destroyed going into halftime. They do get a 59-yard field goal to gather a little bit of momentum, but they do have to kick off to start the second half. And then, much like was the case when I was handed the Ravens in the Sunday night football game, a complete reversal of form. The Vikings put 21 points on the board. The Bears incapable of doing anything. They rallied a little bit late. Didn't really seem like they were going to actually come back and win this game because the time and a lot of other factors were working against them. They did get a late touchdown to cut it to 3, but by that point, you were thinking it was going to be almost impossible, improbable, unfathomable that they would have enough time left on the clock unless they got a fumble on the ensuing kickoff. It was going to be impossible for them to have enough time to gather the distance it would take to cover a field goal try. They ended up getting the ball back with about 16 seconds to go at their own 20, I think it was, or somewhere around there. And then they got a motion penalty, and now that they're back at the 15, and you thought, well, without some kind of miracle, it'd be almost impossible for them to complete a 40-yard pass and run up the field and have enough time to get the field goal unit on and actually kick a game-time field goal. So the conflict was there. I'm rooting for you guys, and I wanted to be right. But at the same time, I can't say that I was dissatisfied in not having to hand over more cash, or at least being on the hook for more capital to the guy whose bet that I was booking. So goes to show you there's no loyalty in gambling. That if money's at stake, you can go against your favorite teams, go against your buddies, go against naturally the bookmakers. And in this case, I would have to say I got a measure of satisfaction out of not losing, especially since I needed to stop this guy's momentum and unfortunately being wrong and misleading you guys yesterday about the Chicago Bears having a chance. So my apologies there. And it was a strange way to watch a ball game in complete conflict. But wow, I mean, if you could avoid just gargling with Valium watching those last couple of games, absolutely incredible. And it leaves us with week 1 in the books in the National Football League. And you're trying to figure out what conclusions can you make. The one story that's really circulating involves our hometown team. And now it's very common to have extreme opinions and express them on video streams and podcasts. And I guess newspapers probably a little bit less of a degree of that. But the common sentiment seemed to be, and now I saw this with Pete Prisco had a video out about it. Pete Prisco, longtime NFL analyst, might have become, like I say, a little bit of an extremist, seems to be extremely negative in a lot of his opinions. And Rex Ryan, who is I give him credit, Rex, for this. I mean, he was always very demonstrative and always very outspoken, usually in a braggadocio style about whatever team he was coaching. But he is one of the few coaches on TV or former coaches on TV that will take shots at a guy that's currently in the game. And both of those guys had long dissertations about how the local coach here with the Miami Dolphins, and you would have to think, is it fair to say that the Miami Dolphins was the most startlingly bad performance of week number 1 of the NFL season? A lot of people have them as a sub-500 team. The over-under number on the Dolphins for the year was 8 and a hook. You had to lay a price to go with the under on the season total. So it wasn't an incredible amount of optimism that was surrounding this team, which you would think if they were doing anything right as an organization, if it wasn't last year, it would be this year that they were really going to hit their stride. But there's still questions, and I think they've been answered. I don't know the Tua Tagovailoa, who got the extension before he went into his fifth year. The front office there, very generous, the Miami Dolphins. They gave him the money, much like the Giants did with Daniel Jones. And now we see Jones, ironically, pitching a rock for the Indianapolis Colts, who pounded the Dolphins into oblivion in week number one in what had to be one of the most embarrassing performances that I've seen. I've been around the Dolphin franchise for 44 years. Possibly one of the most. Now they've been blown out. They had that game in Jacksonville in the playoffs. Marino and Jimmy Johnson. Jimmy Johnson's last game as a Dolphin coach when they got blown out 62-7. I was there that day. It was ugly, completely ugly, and actually led to another mistake by the Dolphins franchise because in that game, if you'll recall, Mark Brunell was the starting quarterback at the time for the Jacksonville Jaguars, who at that point in time were a good team. And he was backed up by Jay Fiedler. And I'll never forget, I was in the elevator going up to the press box because I was doing a pregame show on the radio on the flagship station for the Miami Dolphins. And the elevator operator, they had an elevator operator because not uncommon in stadiums to have somebody actually punching the button for you, asking you where you're going, and maybe trying to eyeball whoever's getting on this elevator and make sure that your credential matches your picture. And the guy says to me that he really thought that Jay Fiedler was a better quarterback than Mark Brunell. And that may have been the case. Brunell leads the Jacksonville Jaguars to a huge lead. Fiedler comes in and looks great and seemed to convince the Miami Dolphins organization that he should be a guy that they targeted to be their quarterback in the post-Marino era. So Danny Boy retires. They do get Jay Fiedler. And Fiedler never really measured up. I mean, he suffered an injury before he got going, a shoulder injury. And while he was a very determined and dogged competitor, and he wasn't the worst quarterback in NFL history, he certainly wasn't what the Dolphins thought they were getting when they watched him destroy them and dissect them in the later stages of that game in Jacksonville that time. So the franchise has been misguided for a long time. They really never have recovered from the Dan Marino era. They haven't won a playoff game since 2000. They've had any number of coaching changes. They've gone through a litany of coaches, including some huge mistakes like Cam, don't call me Coco Cameron, who went 1-15 with the team in 1 year. They brought in all kinds of different personalities, and now they have the resident genius, Mike McDaniel, Mike McGenius. And after making the playoffs his first two seasons, real subpar year last year, Tua, of course, missed a certain number of games with injuries, and you're almost anticipating that. You're hoping that this guy seems like a really good guy, easy guy to root for. I was happy when the Dolphins were able to draft him, even though the tank for Tua thing didn't quite work out the way that they had thought it was, because Brian Flores defied the credo from the upper-level brass, including the owners, supposedly. Still, that lawsuit, I mean, is still pending out there somewhere. I don't know that they've ever come to a conclusion on that. I don't think so. Where Flores implied that Stephen Ross offered him $100,000 a game in bonus money to make sure that he lost every game, which you would think would arouse a lot of suspicion from old Roger Goodell. I don't know that they did too deep of an investigation on that, because certainly that would be despicable in this era where the NFL is firmly in bed with various gambling organizations like DraftKings and FanDuel and any other number of books that they've partnered up with, after for years denying that gambling even existed on their product. So largely fueled by gambling interest, you would have to think that this would have been a major, major issue. And not that much has been said about it since the lawsuit originally surfaced and this implication was made. I think the NFL did one of these real quick investigations and said, no problem here. That being said, though, the franchise turns to McDaniel. They make the playoffs a couple of times, don't win a playoff game, so still shut out since 2000. It's 25 years, no playoff wins. And you have to think, is it not time to take a look at the guys that are in charge from the standpoint of player personnel, and in this case, the general manager, Chris Greer, but gets a free pass from Stephen Ross. We've said this on the show and many other shows. You would wish that Stephen Ross would buy your business, because no matter how big of a fuck up you are, you somehow manage to retain a job. So after watching this, though, and the theory online was with all of the different speculation I saw about the opening week of the NFL season, that Mike McDaniel, the head coach of the Dolphins, either should not or will not survive the season. I'm thinking with the free pass that the Dolphins owner gives virtually everybody, that he probably makes it through the year. I don't know if that's something that you could wager on, but if things don't turn around very quickly, and they have the Patriots on tap this week, and the Patriots, I would say, also put in a very disappointing effort for a team that everybody was so high on. They were making Mike Vrabel out as if he was a second coming of Vince Lombardi. I don't know that he's that. I mean, he did a decent job in his previous coaching tenure, but it was nothing overwhelmingly sensational with Tennessee, but highly coveted after the Gerard Mayo mistake was made by Bob Kraft. To Kraft's credit, unlike Stephen Ross, he admitted that he blew it. And he brings in Vrabel with Patriot history behind him, and he was a great player with the Patriots, decent enough head coach in terms of his resume, to make you think with Drake May showing signs that he was not the mistake a lot of people deemed him to be when the Patriots drafted him last year in a 4-win season. You thought, wow, I mean, maybe the Patriots have a shot. So we'll see. I believe this. If the Dolphins look as horrible as they did, and it's hard to imagine that any team could look as bad as they did in week number 1 on the road against the Indianapolis Colts, making Daniel Jones look like Burt Jones, that you would start to hear even more rumblings about Mike McDaniel getting canned. But week number 1 observations, a lot of exciting games there with the top teams. Buffalo Bills and Baltimore, certainly sensational. Bills defense, what was thought to be very suspect, and that they were, giving up 40 points to the Baltimore Ravens. The Ravens, you always think of them as being a really solid defensive team, but giving up 41 points in the fashion they did and blowing a lead like that in the fourth quarter, a 2-touchdown lead, it's certainly not the 2000 Ravens defense. And we have a tendency to think of teams and characterize them as they were in the distant past. And as the great Rick Pitino said, Larry Bird's not walking through that door. Ray Lewis is not walking through that door. And so that's something to watch. Ravens very capable of scoring, but it seemed like they were equally capable of caving in and giving up a lot of points. That final drive by Josh Allen involved 2 passes that you would think a Ravens defense was not going to be vulnerable to, but he completed both of them well down the field there. And sure enough, they ended up on the losing end of what was a horrible beat if you happen to have Baltimore, and you suffered an equally horrible beat if you followed our recommendation yesterday and took the 1 point with the Chicago Bears. There are some home dogs. I was trying to look up, and I didn't get the actual number. Home dogs prevailing against the spread in the National Football League last year. They gave me all kinds of cockamamie statistics when I tried to tap in on this. And then, of course, it was getting to be post time for the show. So pardon me for what seemed to be a big failure on the lack of preparation by having this number. But you do have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 home dogs this week. None of them look particularly attractive. Jets getting 7 only from the Buffalo Bills. Jets played a decent ball game under Aaron Glenn's leadership. First time out of the chute there against Pittsburgh, but unfortunately ended up losing. If you were a Jet backer, they did cover the point spread. Can they cover against the Bills? Bills looked really good offensively, vulnerable on defense. You did see Justin Fields showing a little bit more of a passing arm there. So 7 points is something that you'd have to consider taking, I guess, with the New York Jets, under the theory that home dogs are usually a pretty good bet against the point spread in the National Football League. I think the Saints are going to be horrible this year. I'm not a big believer in Spencer Rattler. The 49ers appear like they're going to be compromised. Kittle is going to be out of this ball game, and Brock Purdy, questionable on the injury report, maybe even doubtful, because he has a back injury and a toe injury. Now, if Purdy doesn't play, it's a little bit of a different story. But the Saints, 6.5-point home dog to the 49ers, you really got to stretch the boundaries of your imagination to see the Saints winning the game. Can they cover 6.5? That's something we'll have to examine as the week progresses. Tennessee Titans got Cam Ward, number 1 overall pick, and it looked like they were going to give the Broncos a go and knock a lot of people out, possibly, of the survivor pools. A lot of big money at stake in survivor pools, including at the Circa, which is the big one. But the Titans, unfortunately, saw Cam Ward fold and not be able to get away with the kind of stuff he would if he was playing Bethune-Cookman last year with the University of Miami. Drops back 2 times to pass the football after they had recovered deep in Broncos territory with a chance to tie the game. They were down 20-12 at the time. Takes 2 consecutive 10-plus yard losses. And so rookie mistakes by Cam Ward, and also you would have to say a very vulnerable offensive line put Tennessee on the losing side of that thing. That was the final. They're playing the LA Rams, and the Rams were very lucky to survive their game against the Houston Texans. Looks like the Texans had this thing in a position where they could win it. They're driving. They're down around the 15-yard line with a chance to go ahead and take the lead late in the ball game. Fumble the football away. Nice play defensively by the Rams. And so the Titans getting 6.5 at home from the Rams. Kind of an interesting proposition there. The Colts, I wasn't overwhelmingly impressed by the Broncos, as we said in that Tennessee game. They were good enough to win it, but were they good enough to go ahead and lay on the road 2.5 against the Colts? Who have we underestimated? The Indianapolis Colts. Daniel Jones looked great. Either the Dolphins are really bad or the Colts are not as bad as a lot of people thought they were going to be. So that might be a place to take a shot as well. And then Las Vegas, of course, with Geno Smith now at quarterback in a Monday night doubleheader, second half of that, taking on the LA Chargers, who looked really, really good under Jim Harbaugh and beating the Philadelphia Eagles in the season opener. Las Vegas getting 3 points at home against the Chargers. Is that enough, people, to convince you to take a shot with the home dogs? But we'll get into that as the week progresses. The Thursday night game's kind of interesting because I thought, and this is wild, I'm looking at my chart here in the New York Post of the odds. The Packers installed originally as 3.5-point favorites over what they list as the Redskins. So people are still making that mistake, or unless Donald Trump signed some kind of executive order and actually got the name changed. But the Commanders, who were victorious over what appeared to be an inept New York Giants team, if Mike McDaniel is suspect to make it through the season, so is Brian Daboll with the New York Giants, because Daboll and Shane, the brass there, coach and general manager, you don't know if there's a seat hot enough to accompany them through the season. They looked awful with Russell Wilson, and there's already a cry in New York to maybe go ahead and put the kid in there. That was another thing Rex Ryan was talking about. Why not just throw Jackson Dart in there now? You're going nowhere with Russell Wilson. Ship may have sailed on Wilson. He was okay last year at times with the Pittsburgh Steelers, but didn't really finish all that strongly. You have to figure he's maybe a stopgap measure where you can stop the bleeding with the Giants, who were horrible again last year. But it didn't look good. I mean, a big Rodan-sized egg that he laid in game number 1. I don't know if I'm putting Dart in there just yet, but the Packers were so impressive in their opening week victory, and they took on the Detroit Lions, who people thought, in spite of losing their coordinators, Ben Johnson and Aaron Glenn, on both sides, offense and defense, that the Lions would be good again this year. And they may well be, but they were handled by the Green Bay Packers. So I'm looking at that game and thinking the Packers might be a little bit better than we thought. Micah Parsons wasn't a huge factor, but he did have a sack in the game. He played about half the snaps. You'd have to think maybe he gets a little more involved in the action. Packers going into week number 2, laying 3 and a hook, and at home at Lambeau against the Commanders might be the way that we're leaning right now. But week 1, I don't know how many definitive conclusions you can make, because we see a lot of changes. Things tend to flip-flop in week number 2. So once again, our recommendation is tread easily, people. Tread easily going into week number 2, because you may see a lot of differential in the way all teams perform going into that second week. I mentioned this stat, and that is average depth of attempt of target, average depth of target, ADOT. Maybe you guys are pounding that aspect. I find it interesting, being an old school guy, because you used to just use your own judgment, right? You'd see some comparative results, teams that played common opponents. You looked at how the current form was going, or whether a team was possibly on the rise or maybe about to be one that you should fade. And then all of this analysis, paralysis by analysis, came into existence with statistical numbers that you would never even imagined or dreamt up. Now this one's significant, because if guys are stinking and dunking, I'm thinking that Chad Henne when he was with the Miami Dolphins probably was the advent of this particular stat. So, the guy's completing 70% of his passes, but the average depth of target was like minus 3 yards. I'm doing this in reference to the game that the Georgia has on the road against Tennessee. Game day is going to be in Knoxville. It's one of the marquee games on a college schedule. Georgia, not exactly what they've been after losing even more players on offense than they had during the year that they were kind of down a little bit last year from the back-to-back championships. And they have their new quarterback in there is this guy, Gunnar Stockton. Gunnar Stockton is particularly inept. He's 62nd in the country at average depth of target. Now, the reason that I think has more significance is because it wasn't like he was playing top-notch competition. These stats were accumulated in games against Marshall and Austin Peay. So 5.1 yards is his average depth of target. Not exactly what you would say is some kind of loosey-goosey gambling, let's throw it deep offense. Can he do that against Tennessee? Tennessee beat Syracuse. Syracuse didn't look very good in their ensuing week as they had to go to overtime at home against a UConn team that they were favored by a touchdown against, and has been unimpressive this year. They lost McCord to the National Football League, and they just don't appear to be an overwhelmingly strong team. So hard to rate what Tennessee's win against Syracuse was worth. And yet Georgia playing two cupcakes, now going on the road with a guy who's going to try and dunk his way into the end zone. Might be worth taking a shot there with Tennessee plus 4.5. Try and get a little deeper into that game as well as the week progresses. But I'm thinking you're not going to be able to do this, certainly in the SEC. And so now getting an SEC test, as clever as Kirby Smart can be, and as much as he gets out of his players, if that's all you're going to do and not pose much of a threat or any kind of a threat down the field, I'm thinking the Tennessee Volunteers getting points might be the play against the Georgia Bulldogs, who are looking to go to 3-0. All right, good luck, everybody. It's got a lot of baseball action. One game that we were looking at from an over-under standpoint was the Mets in Philadelphia. They played a 1-0 game last night. Nolan McLean, who came up and won his first 3 starts for the Mets, gives up the 1 run, sustains his lone loss. Philly and the Mets have both been knocking the crap out of the ball. And so the over-under total in this game is 8.5. You have Sean Manaea going for the New York Mets. He's been getting torched. And he is in a matchup. Sean Manaea is going against the Phillies, who also are throwing a guy in Warren who hasn't been great of late. Soto's been on fire. You've seen the Philly bats really come to life. Scored a lot of runs in recent ball games. Does it turn around tonight? Might take a shot here. Just a slight lean towards over 8.5. Mets and Philadelphia. Thinking both pitchers are going badly. Manaea was talked about as maybe even being dropped from the rotation. And so over 8.5 doesn't seem too prohibitive. Going to go ahead and take a flyer with that. And hopefully we don't suffer the same ugly fate that we did with the Bears last night, who were dominating the game. You saw no way you were going to lose that ball game until we got to the fourth quarter, and all of a sudden McCarthy's hitting everything, and the Bears couldn't stop them and couldn't generate any offense on their own, even though they'd been just mowing through the Minnesota Vikings defense early in the game. Minnesota's defense definitely picked up the pace, but two wild beats if you happen to be in those late games on Sunday and then the Monday nighter. 2 very, very tough beats if you had the Ravens and the Bears. Going to be a difficult one to recover from. All right, we will see you tomorrow. Next edition of Bury Your Bookie. Thanks so much for tuning in, everybody. I'm Jeff DeForest, and good luck with all your wagers. So we're on the ledger as having over Phillies and the Mets. And then we're thinking about taking the points with the Tennessee Volunteers in their game against the Georgia Bulldogs. So let's hope we don't get cremated on those 2 plays. See you next time on the next edition of Bury Your Bookie.